Here we go. All right, thank you all for coming today. So you can see my screen, hopefully. So we're talking about pasture management for your property. And so I just want to start out by saying my name is Amanda Smith. I work for the Langley Environmental Partner Society as their agricultural stewardship coordinator. We do lots of stuff as LEPS, but we're doing a series of webinars. And tonight we're talking about pasture management. It's, again, one of the most enjoyable ones that we can actually kind of settle it in for, because we're talking about our animals and their health, not just strictly regulations, although some things unfortunately still come up during our presentation, but it's not as heavy as some of the other ones. And I'll just mention right now, as April 15th is going to be wells and well registration and septic. So there's a lot of water being talked about in that one. And I hope to have some updated information from the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment within that one by the 15th. So that's just going to be next month. This usually happens again. I know, Adam, you know. Oh, here we are. Ooh, LEPS. Okay, great. So for anybody who is new to LEPS or hasn't been to one of our webinars, or really kind of been following us for a while, this is just sort of a reminder of who we are. So we are now in our 31st year of existence within the township and city of Langley. LEPS protects and restores a natural environment through education, cooperation, and action. We are non-for-profit, non-governmental, and we are an environmental organization. Started in 1993, we are a combination of full-time and seasonal staff, and our core programs that we typically have our staff fall under, because the staff can swell between, in the winter months or the fall and winter months, really down to about 5 or 6, and then we can go up to at least 12 or sometimes 15 in the summertime. So we kind of factor ourselves into watershed stewardship, agricultural stewardship, restoration, and education. So why we're doing a series of webinars is we got some wonderful funding in December of 2023, and it was from Eco Action and Climate Change Canada to do some outreach work in Langley to reduce pollution and bacterial contamination in freshwater ecosystems. So we're dealing with, so essentially our funding had to deal with water, but it also is going to be, how are we getting ourselves out there? How are we teaching people about some of the rules and regulations? Because some people just don't know them. They're not always easy to find. And one of the documents that I'm going to be sharing with you, maybe as a follow-up in an email, is, if you don't have access to this one document that was supported by the Ministry of Agriculture, you might want it. So it's called the Land Management Guide for Horse Owners and Small Lot Farmers, but it includes a lot of other rules and regulations, but in a much easier, approachable way. So dealing with Langley, because that's kind of where we are with LEPS, is we refer to it as very special. It has over 700 kilometers of fish-bearing streams, and really out of this wonderful grant that we received from Climate Change Canada, we hope to increase citizens aware of rural land management and practices through site consultations. So if you want a site consultation from LEPS, that probably would be me in the end. We'll go through kind of your property, and if you are one of those people who would love free tarps or free plants, we can give those to you. We are doing some water quality testing in certain watersheds, and a series of webinars such as this one. So I had mentioned already before, we have one more webinar for water and well registration septics going to be next month. That will be one of the last ones for, until we kind of get through the spring and the summer. And then we're going to be having more webinars as we go into the fall and the winter. So we're here for pasture management. Again, when I say this is a much easier one to talk about, it is probably the most pleasurable one, because again, I get to actually talk about animals and their care, and essentially, like, how to manage your pasture. So in terms of pasture renovation, we are really looking at your properties and thinking about exactly, like, if you had just purchased your property, or if you just really haven't gotten out there and looked at it to see what has popped up. Because again, if we're getting 25 degrees and then we have flooding, like we're getting kind of really big swings in our weather, that actually has an impact on your land. So pasture renovation is just literally looking, do I need to do anything different? Do I need to adapt to something? Am I changing? Am I noticing more weeds? So really looking at your property, and I think renovation is probably a strong word, but it really is renovating your property to make sure that your animals are very healthy. So again, we're going down to, we want to reduce our feed costs. So talking to a lot of farmers within the township of Langley, whether they are, doing any kind of horse breeding, or if they're racing, or if we're even talking about, sheep and chicken, feed costs have gone up in a massive way. So more people who have not grazed, because Langley Township is made up of mostly small and medium sized rural properties, just due to the parcelization and all the creek systems. It is a pretty big concern, and people are wanting to use their property a bit more and their land. So reducing feed costs is one. Health problems within their animals is paramount. Erosion, getting flooding, making sure that we kind of see if we have a water course on our property, where exactly is that impacting your soils. And also weed concerns, because weed seeds fly in the air, and even though you do regular checks of your pasture, you still want to make sure that nothing has been flown into your land. And also it minimizes stall cleaning. So yeah, getting them out in pasture certain times of the year when it's not wet and muddy is very, very beneficial. So in terms of maintaining your pasture or renovating or changing, there's like really two components. So one is partial and one is complete. So partial would be if your grasses appear to be lacking in density. So you've got some extra spots where there's nothing there, or if it's overrun by weeds. And again, we want to really make sure that in that case is partial. You're trying just to improve your drainage, your aerating, and you're eliminating acidic conditions, reseeding grasses if you need to, and also spreading manure. And, for people who watch this webinar, because we are recording it and we're putting it on our YouTube channel, partial is a pretty much of a basic thing, not only for pasture, but you could actually kind of follow that specific, generalization and explanation into just doing lawn. And that would be all obviously for someone who's different. But in this case, we're spreading manure, we're reseeding, and we're eliminating acidic conditions. Now, that would be the partial renovation. Complete would be if less than 25% of your pasture growth is composed of desirable plant species. So reseeding to match your soil, rototilling existing grasses to maintain a seed bed and spread, and keep horses off the field until new grasses are established to at least a height of 15 to 20 centimeters. So that means like you are probably looking at a pasture area that really needs quite a bit of work. Partial can be very simple, but reseeding and maybe aerating and spreading manure, whereas complete would be a little bit more of an ambitious goal, but obviously you need your pasture for a certain reason. Okay, so we're talking again, we mentioned grasses and pasture. Number one thing is being able to identify weeds and poisonous plants. So again, knowing that weed seeds fly in the air. I do really like to talk about plants quite a bit. I'm very open to all plants, but nothing that is poisonous for animals and also invasive. So what we really need to do is figure out what exactly you have on your pasture, and you need to kind of get used to seeing your weeds and kind of IDing them. So the ones that are very poisonous to horses, cattle, and sheep would be creeping buttercup, field horsetail, and tansy ragwort. So with those ones just listed there, those are the ones you really do need to be aware of. Everybody knows what creeping buttercup is, but you may not know tansy ragwort. So if you're taking notes tonight, those will be three that you really want to be very cautious of, because that can create swelling in the mouth if they are grazing. And sometimes just overall bad health in other ways. So like people, not every horse or animal is the same. So keep in mind those three that are poisonous. So ones that are just quite frankly annoying because they multiply like crazy would be mostly your thistle that will land, which is this guy on the bottom here with the blue background. That thistle can be very uncomfortable if you're grazing on it. It can still kind of puncture any mouths. And the stinging nettle, also the same. So those are just ones that are I put into that kind of annoying category. Those are the two ones you don't want. Mostly when you see stinging nettle, that will be more of a forested area if you have that attached to your property with blackberry and trees, and it's kind of more of a forest. But this, yeah, that stinging nettle thistle will fly anywhere, and just be cautious of that. And then obviously with LEPS, being the Langley Environmental Partner Society, doing restoration in a lot of our water courses, is that we want to be really aware of hogweed and Himalayan balsam. So hogweed is this lovely, pretty one that has that cute little flower there. Please don't touch that with your hands. You need to have gloves, and not just plastic gloves. You need to have very, very thick, heavy gloves that are plastic, because that will burn your skin, and it is toxic and it is very invasive. So you don't ever want to see that flower. The minute you see that flower go, then you got your hogweed just moving around. Himalayan balsam, we couldn't quite fit all of them onto the screen, but Himalayan balsam typically grows, around water courses. It will literally spit their flower seed when the flower goes, opens up, which is a very pretty flower, but it spits the seed out with, and it just keeps multiplying in that same season. So it's one of those ones you just want to be aware of. We can see it in a lot of our ditches when we're driving around the township of Langley, but it's one that is very easy to remove, Himalayan balsam. Whereas hogweed, that is a little bit more hard to remove, but it is possible. Himalayan balsam has a very shallow root system and has a hollow stalk. So we mentioned this not only because if you're maintaining your pasture and thinking that, if you need to deal with your weeds and being able to identify them, and also for the care of your health of your animals, that's one thing. But the BC Weed Control Act and municipal laws as well, comply to this. Controlling weeds on pastures or on farmland is very, very important. And some actually require a permit to remove, which is Japanese knotweed. And I'm not too sure if everybody has seen a Japanese knotweed before, but it can actually bust through concrete and sometimes home foundations. So very, very important to know your weeds. I'll mention an app that you can use a bit later within the presentation. So removing weeds, again, just noting that, some of them need a permit, like Japanese knotweed. Some of them can just be pulling the weeds, mowing, although mowing, catch it before flower heads develop, and like how I noted with our little hogweed here, but be on top of them. And mostly, like, I know sometimes the flower head is how people kind of identify what their weeds are, but try to look at the leaves because you want to catch them before they actually flower. You can also till and burn. So, but all of them will have benefits. It depends on the weed and depends on how invasive it is and how dangerous. So talking again about pasture, we've mentioned about weeds. Now we're talking about soil. So a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about now with this specific slide is really getting to know what your soil is. So weeds will fly anywhere. Certain grasses, when they flower, they typically spill down, but weeds really do fly depending on how much wind we get. But soil analysis is one of the major things that you're going to need to know if you're going to be doing any sort of pasture renovation, or if you are just really wanting to know what kind of grasses you want to get for your grass seeds. So the thing with soil is that under the new Agricultural Environmental Management Code of Practice, soil testing is required for those who apply nutrients. Okay, so we're applying nutrients, which could be compost or manure. and you have a land base of 2 hectares or more. So we're talking about more or less people with very large properties. And so under that BC government regulation, they're wanting you to test your soil. And especially if you're applying nutrients. And because we're having a slight water problem, which is why that's the next slide. So that would be either groundwater, not just only surface water in our water courses. But if you apply manure to only maybe half an acre, so you have homes in the property or outbuildings, but you still have half an acre of just pasture for your animals. And you still just, in this case, you just need to do a nitrate and phosphorus test, and it's connected every 3 years for the area of field you're applying nutrients. So they're just trying to balance exactly like what is going into our groundwater, especially if you have wells. So talking about wells, just very at a high level, even though we're not on that webinar that's occurring in April, is that there are boundary setbacks for wells and also a nutrient application in regards to those systems and also septic. So soil testing, very important. Which leads me to this, which includes that soil test. So if you're spreading composted manure on your pasture and not just relying on just basic use of it with your animals and or your horses, that's one thing. But if you are applying manure, the ministry would like you to do some record keeping. This would be under the Agricultural Environmental Management Code of Practice. We do have a bit of a, kind of a template that we have here. And I know that you're kind of looking, and hopefully you're on a larger computer, but it does actually have in here, like when your most recent soil test and the result and when you had it. And they just want to know, because of the weather disasters that we've had in the past few years, whether it has to do with wildfires or with flooding, it's kind of impacting our water. Back in 2021 in November, when we had the flooding in Abbotsford, which kind of went into Chilliwack and then kind of cut off transportation routes, a lot of wells got damaged. And, if we're not really, having record keeping, or if our neighbor has an issue with what we're doing, having a record keeping manual or a binder that you can keep on your property, in a barn or in your home. And it just serves as a history. And also, again, with your soil tests. So they just want to make sure that we're doing okay, because the one thing about doing pasture and spreading manure and dealing with these two things is it's not really just only about the health of the animal. It also has to do with health of humans. Yeah, so we are in new times, and we just have to be a bit more vigilant and care for what is the most important thing to our lives, which is either our family, friends, and our animals. So now you're thinking, okay, so we talked about pasture renovation, we've talked about soil testing. So when we're talking about human and animal health, now we get down to seed mixes and forage quality. So most people who watch our YouTube channel tend to be majority people who live in the township of Langley that have horses. We do have a bit of a reach in Maple Ridge and into Delta, into Abbotsford and Chilliwack. But anybody who has access to our YouTube channel, I didn't want to go too detailed, because regionally, where we are, depending on our environment, our weather, we're going to be having different grasses available to us that are probably either cold hardy or a little bit more general than what we are dealing with now. So having diverse seed mixes are probably the most beneficial. So you don't want to go all kind of one sort of grass or fescue. You want to have a diverse seed mix, because that allows for more nutrition for your horses that will graze. And going more in depth, so I mean, I could have mentioned a list of places where you can go to a seed retailer. Although in the township of Langley, like the big ones would be our co-op, Milner Feed. There's also some in the state of Washington, and we do have quite a few followers actually that are also in Washington, but check with anybody that you would buy your feed at if they're going to be in a sacrifice area and we'll get to that in the next couple slides, but just talk with them after you have tested your soil, because they would like to know really, not really just the nutrient level of what the soil is, but they want to know if it drains or if it holds water. Okay. Clay soils, you will have different seeds than you will with really well-drained soils. So within that sort of sphere, you're looking mostly for tall fescues, bentgrass, perennial ryegrasses, and fine fescues that are good for exercise areas and grazing hay. So just really, like, that's why the major thing is to test your soil so you know what you're dealing with and you know what to plant. Yeah, and then you can have a stronger control of your forage and your grazing areas. So we go on to grazing management, and this is where I didn't want to put too much information onto the slide. I'd rather talk through it a little bit more, but letting pasture grass reach to about 15 to 20 centimeters. And that's going to be the best thing for them to start to graze. And they can, as long as they can graze it down to about 8 to 10 centimeters to make sure that the grasses are not completely low to the ground, because they're going to really struggle because of the amount of sun and the amount of water. Most people actually don't really water their pasture. So it's just really, you know, the best management practice would be to let your pasture grass reach, have it, you know, graze down to about at least 7 centimeters down to that 8 to 10. And then that means that pasture will be able to grow even, you know, quite quickly because it has all of the reserves to regrow. And when it comes to larger properties, and then we're talking more about, we're going more about like 20 acres and more, because again, we jumped down to the big one here, but the rule of thumb for in terms of grazing would be 1 horse per acre, and then use of a sacrifice area. So this is where it gets complicated. I could have probably 5 slides on this and expand this into 2 hours, but the major thing is that a rotational system of grazing would be the same thing as a crop rotation with, you know, a vegetable farm. So you're having a you know, a 4-point system where you're moving around your crops, and then you're also dividing your property into a square of 4, and then your animals take one area to graze, then they are moved, and depending on how much they're eating and how many horses you have. So it's one thing that you have to sort of manage your own property. That's kind of just a rule of thumb and a guideline, but it will help with proper manure distribution when you have a large property and you have them segregated into kind of like a rotational grazing system. And you will have not only an increased amount of grass, but also really, really good quality. So the more you prune, the better the regrowth is. In the same manner here is that when you can control the grazing length of your grasses or your fescues, then you will have a better nutrition system and manure distribution. So a lot of the things that we're talking about today is really out of, which I had mentioned earlier, is this all-in-one resource, which is the Land Management Guide for Horse Owners and Small Lot Farmers. And now to give you a bit more information on this, we've had kind of a series of webinars because this particular manual is kind of divided up by chapters. So chapters meaning we have manure management, we have water management, we have pasture management, because they are in chapters. So we're trying to break down the guide that is easy to follow in a few different webinars. And if you don't really have time to sit and watch, I can send you a quick online link to this guide, because it actually includes everything you need. It doesn't really have that fine, minute details of your municipal laws, but this is the big stuff where it deals with water and it deals with a lot of the provincial things. And actually, when it comes to water and water courses, then that's more of a DFO federal level type thing. But what I like about the guide is that it's kind of an all-in-one stop shop thing. So it doesn't really only cover the BC Weed Control Act, but the Water Sustainability Act. And there's a nod to your local health authority. So Fraser Health is broken up into a few different, so we have Coastal Health, we have Fraser Health. Fraser Health or our health authority they have a jurisdiction regarding health, which is why they're the ones who hold the information about how often you must test your well. And it's not the Ministry of Environment or Agriculture. It is your local health authority, and they literally say that you must test your well once a year, although best practices would be twice a year. So that would be either in the spring or the fall. So this resource was originally published and written in 2007, and it was revised in 2020 just because government regulations change all the time, and they're updated. And this was actually, I think it's probably one of the most easiest reads. It's very uncomplicated. It's very approachable, like hopefully some of our webinars. So they're a little bit more, it's a really good guide just to have in your barn or in your home, and just refer to it because it's all up to date. So I know webinars can take, we don't want to be on the computer for very long. So I'm hoping that I included quite a few bits of information, hopefully. But our takeaways from today, which I hope you find helpful, or maybe even news to you, is test your soil. And I would say probably testing your soil would be within our weather. And if you were in a flooding area, I probably would be testing it once a year. If you're in the township of Langley, then it would you be going to Element, which is on the border of Surrey and the city of Langley, but that is there for testing. Yes, Sharon. Yes, it's sold for $6 if you want the hard copy, but I still have access to the online version, which is free. So identifying your weeds, that's a big thing that I think that hopefully that's a takeaway, is that you need to kind of walk your property and take a look at your pasture quite a few times in the year. Now there is an app, because there is an app for everything, and it is called the iNaturalist app. It tends to be all inclusive with all plant material, especially when you're doing any foraging, or if you're doing a nature walk, but it will identify some weeds if you're just unsure. So I would definitely download the iNaturalist app to help you when you're doing your walks. Also, another takeaway is recording your manure application. Like you've got to record your manure if you're distributing it, especially if you have some tight boundaries on your property in terms of your septic and your well. If anybody here wants to know a little bit more about some of those distances and those boundaries, please let me know, because I have a nice little cheat sheet that I've developed, and it will tell you what some of your boundaries are, and hopefully keep our water courses clean. So I didn't really want to include the one slide that I usually do to show people why we're talking about this, but if Langley has 700 kilometers of salmon-bearing streams, we actually have 1,500 kilometers of water courses in general, and water flows south, or it flows down, as we say. And the state of Washington does water quality testing as well, and they see what is being captured in their property, in their water courses. And I remember I was actually flying in, and I saw from an aerial vision about some of the soil erosion during this really wet time and what was flowing in. So we need to be a little bit more vigilant, not only for our animals, but also for our neighbors as well. So hopefully we can keep our water courses clean, and everybody will be healthy and happy. So that is kind of the conclusion. I didn't want it to be too long, but I will turn the recording off very soon. and you can ask some questions. I'll do my best to answer. But not only am I thanking you for coming today, I get to be very happy to say that if you are going to the Can-Am Equine Expo in Chilliwack, LEPS will be there on Saturday, April 13th. And I get to do a wonderful presentation combining manure management and water management. So it'll be a little bit of a longer presentation, but I hope that you can join us. And I'm going to stop sharing now. But if you have any other questions and you're not feel comfortable but asking them today, you can just simply send myself an email at agriculture@leps.bc.ca, or you can, I'm also chair of the Langley Farmers Institute, and we're trying to engage our local equine community as well. So there we go. I'm going to see if I can turn my recording off, and then I will head away for some questions.